Congresswoman, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be on. Good to see you.
All right, I'm going to throw a curveball your way. You didn't know I was going to start this, but I sat down with your buddy, my buddy, our buddy, Byron Donalds, the other day at the White House. And I was talking to him about strategy. You're already smiling, but I don't know that you even know where I'm going with this.
No,
I
you
talked to
said Byron. You gotta smile when you just hear
right.
Byron's
I know
name,
that's the
right?
thing.
Yeah.
So I asked him. I was like, how do we communicate the Trump message? We were talking about just sort of the differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2. And one of the things that I think is interesting is I've always talked about the people in the administration who are different. But then I started to say the difference for me, like I remember we didn't have, like the Republican Congress definitely was a majority, but they weren't the allies that you guys are now to President Trump. So we were talking about how the team is different and who effective people are. And I want you to hear what he had to say. Take a listen.
On Capitol Hill, God bless everybody. But this is the time where you send out your 10 best horses to go get the job done. You know what I mean?
Like you gotta give me the 10 best horses.
Oh, on Capitol Hill?
Yeah.
Oh, Ted, Mike Lee, Beth Van Duyne out of Texas. Yeah. She's excellent, really, really good. Myself, Mace, Jim Jordan, Corey Mills out of Florida is actually better than people realize. He's really good at this. He's really, but you got to get the people who you know can take a message and go run with it.
Byron Donald says you're one of the 10 top communicators on the Hill for the president's agenda. We're at a critical time right now. I mean, we've got to get the president's agenda through Congress. And so in all seriousness, do you think that you guys are ready and able and willing to carry the president's message to the American people? Because it's not just passing it. We got to talk about it.
No, it's absolutely right. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We've been working on this one big, beautiful bill, for the last 2.5 years that we've been talking about it. We've been talking about what's been happening at the border, since I've gotten elected, for the last 5 years, we've been drawing attention to it. But the fact is that the American people have an idea of what's going on. I know the mainstream media does not help us, but I think November shows that no matter what they hear, they can also see. And with their own eyes, they saw what was happening with their investments, with their retirement, with egg prices and such. They saw what was happening in their communities with crime, and then the black and white difference since January. And in fact, we've got 99% less people entering our country illegally now than a year ago. That's phenomenal. The fact that you got eggs prices now that are down by over 50%. You got gas prices now that are lower than they were since COVID. Those are things that are making a difference. And while this president, you were part of the first administration, I was part of the first administration. You saw all of the things that we had to fight in order to get messages across, in order to get things passed in Congress. There's still going to be a fight that happens. And, we're all behind the scenes right now working on this one big, beautiful bill. But as we are putting it together, the president is going out there and he's fighting for working families. And I think that's something that we're all supportive of. We are looking at government spending on, and I think that's something that some of the fiscal hawks are having a hard time getting that message out, that yes, while we want to have these tax cuts, and we recognize the fact that we have got to get the TCJA provisions extended. If we don't, every single family in America is going to see some of the highest tax increases in our nation's history. We have to get that done. But at the same token, we can't, just relax on the fact that it's not going to cost money. And we've got to figure out not where we can slice, not where we can shave, but where we can actually cut. And I think the DOGE efforts, again, by this president, he's been leading this, looking at waste, fraud, and abuse is something we definitely are going to concentrate on. But it's very difficult for Democrats to actually defend where they're identifying these waste, fraud, and abuse. But they are just attacking the messenger. And unfortunately, they just can't seem to get their eye off the ball. It's constantly attacking President Trump or his allies. And, in that case, it was Elon Musk. We're doing our best to get those messages out. We have a very strong message that the American people support. And we just got to keep making sure that we've got the microphone to do it.
All right. I want to get to the bill, to spending, to taxes. I mean, so much that you just brought up DOGE. I mean, all that. Before I do that, you mentioned, you and I both worked in that first administration, you over at HUD for Dr. Ben Carson. I talked to the current secretary of HUD. I'm always intrigued by this. I don't know that everyone, but I asked Byron the same question, but like, what to you is different, better, about Trump 2 than Trump 1?
I think Trump 1 was coming in and not recognizing the fact, very similar to what Dr. Carson experienced. You think you're putting together a team and everybody's on the same page and you all have the same goal. And I think he recognizes that that's not actually the case all the time in politics. So I think the clear difference is that he has had now over 8 years to devise a strategy, to
Yeah.
put together a team that works well together. They all understand what the game plan is and they're all pushing for it. I think he's also had an opportunity to be able to prove himself. His first 4 years in office, when he first started, there were still some Republicans who were saying, is he really a Republican or is he a Democrat? He supported, Democrats in the past. What's he really doing? I think, look, he's been very clear. He wants to get things done. It's a very short period of time to get those things done. And he has got a plan and he's moving forward on it like breakneck speed. And he's got a Congress now that's willing to work with him on that, recognizing the path. He's got the support of the American people.
Yeah. So you and I are on the same page on this because I think people writ large, the people who he brought in, the people who kept away, and the team around him, including you guys in Congress, is so different and more committed to the agenda. It's a totally different environment. But let's get down to brass tacks, as they say, and actually talk about. I mean, you brought this up. The American people are going to judge us by results, and getting this big, beautiful bill over the finish line is important to his agenda. It's important, I think, to the House majority. So let's just start with a broad question. Where does it stand right now?
Well, right now we're still having debates, on coming up with our draft. And a lot of the debates have to do with how much to spend. We got a $37 trillion debt. We're spending more to service our debt now than we are on our defense. It's not sustainable. If people are really concerned and interested in carrying programs like Social Security or Medicare, those programs are going to take an automatic hit if we do not get our spending under control. It won't be a congressional vote. It will automatically happen. So in order to save those programs, we have to make sure that we're being very fiscally responsible. These tax cuts, all of them are going to have costs associated with them. But the same token, we need to be focused on growing the economy. And that is, I think, where you're seeing things like the small business, the 199A pass through, the tax cuts on the tax rebates on R&D, research and development, making sure that we've got innovation that's happening in our country. We are prioritizing those. But all of those are going to have to be met with other kind of cuts in spending cuts. But the fact is that you saw how much we added during COVID. We are doing things that the federal government should never have invested in. We have hired people, we have contracted with people that we had no business extending that. States are great at what they do. And unfortunately, the federal government getting its hands on everything and using COVID as an excuse to do it was just poor managing, poor planning. And it has really been devastating, I think, to our economy. So what we're trying to do is re-privatize our economy. If you look at the job numbers that just came in the last quarter, they were phenomenal because 100% of the job growth was on the private sector side. It wasn't government jobs, which we saw during the Biden administration. And getting those costs back, getting those investments back on the private sector side. The fact is that through these policies and through just executive orders alone, and the focus that Trump has had on growing the economy, you've seen private investment from businesses of $5 trillion. You also have some countries, the UAE included, that have promised up to $3 trillion already in investments. That's where we need to concentrate. But again, the investment in our country, we cannot grow our way out of this. We also have to be fiscal hawks and looking at the spend.
So totally agree. That sounds very common sense, smart, Republican. I mean, okay, check.
But agreeing where you're going to have those cuts is the difficult part.
As they like to say, there's the rub. So where's the rub? I mean, you read the stuff. You've got people that are very concerned about Medicaid cuts, to which I've argued, I don't think the president will go for them anyway. So why are we that should be a non-starter. But what is the rub? Where is it that the argument? I mean, because again, I think you take those top points that Beth Van Duyne just laid out, and people go, "Oh, I'm on board." But clearly, there's pushback. I think not just among House colleagues, but clearly the Senate doesn't want to do this. And I kind of go why are you a Republican if you don't want to reduce spending? So it's the devil in the detail. Where's the rub that's holding this up from moving quicker?
Everybody has, 750,000 people or more that they represent, and everybody has a different, district. So if you're looking at Medicaid, I disagree. I think the White House has been very clear that they want to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse. The White House, and pretty much every American, except for a few who can't really, define or defend, don't want people who are here illegally on Medicaid, who are taking, money away from those who actually need it. If you are a strong working American and you have an ability to be able to work, you should not be on Medicaid.
So
If you're
who disagrees with that?
19 and
Who,
55, I'm sorry?
but that's what I agree. Like again, this is why Byron Donald sung your praises. I agree with exactly what you're saying.
But I
Then
think the
who?
White House,
But who's defending? Who's defending that? Who's saying no? I want. I mean, this is where I go. What's the problem? I don't see a single Republican that should have a problem with anything that Beth Van Duyne is saying. Not one, nada.
We represent different districts. So districts in New York are going to have a different case, and they're more sensitive to the Medicaid. Salt tax. That's probably a really good one that's been very public. You've got the Salt Caucus that represent areas where they are, the constituents are getting raped by their local and state governments tax-wise, but they get to take those off their federal taxes, which means that states like Florida and Texas are having to make up for it. Now you've got people who represent those districts in New York and in California that want to decrease or want to increase the cap that was put on salt back in 2017 as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Those are discussions that we're having. One side is going to argue that, look, red states shouldn't have to make up for the bad decisions of blue states. And the blue states are saying, well, we've got, representatives, we represent constituents that are fed up with it and they need some tax relief. Those are conversations that we're having. The Inflation Reduction Act, which let's just call it was the Inflation Act. But every single Republican voted against the IRA, but they have provisions in there that are helpful to some states and some districts. So while I'm willing to push everything back on the table and get some of the pay-fors from the IRA, you've got other members who are saying, well, we've got businesses that invested in this technology specifically because of the IRA. You can't change the rules halfway down the field. So those are the discussions that we are having right now. But I'm with you. We need to cut. We don't need to trim, because we have seen the overblown spending and what it's gotten us. And the fact is that we're arguing nickels now, but those dollars are going to go down the drain, and we're not even going to have a control over it if we don't start tailing in those spending now.
So the way that I think it's a pretty obvious read is you've got some members, and I get it, like the Mike Lawlers that worry about that state and local tax deduction because New York is getting their governor. They have a blue, a leftist governor. And I get why, like someone like a Mike Lawler cares, or a Jeff Van Drew in New Jersey, or you brought up California. I get it. They care about those. They also care about how much is Medicare is dealing with. Beyond that, though, and then you've got Chip Roy from your state who thinks that we're not doing enough. I get it. This is not letting, but the problem I think is actually bigger, which is the Senate. The Senate doesn't want to do as much. And so the concern is are you guys like, I just play this out for me. Do you think that you guys come to a deal and then you hold firm against the Senate? I mean, if you had to look into a crystal ball, how does this play out and when?
There's a number of different ways that this could play out. One, you're going to have, the fiscal hawks in the House hold this bill and say, until you get these cuts, we're not going to move. And we're not going to get it out of the House. Now, the president could come in and say, we have to get this moving. And then there could be some kind of a compromise struck. Now, that compromise, the Senate probably will not accept. So are they going to come back and bring us another bill? What I have seen in the last 5 years, which is very frustrating, is we have these machinations between the House and the Senate. We put ourselves up against the deadline, and then we end up passing basically a Democrat bill to be able to get everybody on board. I would hate to see that happen. You have got a very narrow majority in both, the House and the Senate, but we've got the will to be able to move forward on a Republican conservative bill. If we don't, if we're unable to get our votes in the House, if we're unable to get the votes in the Senate, you might see that you've got a Ways and Means chairman who is willing to work with the Democrats to make sure that the TCJA provisions are extended. Because like I said, if we don't extend those provisions, you're going to see the largest tax increase on American families in our nation's history, and we can't afford that to happen.
And I think that's the big takeaway, right? If we don't pass these tax cuts that are going to expire, everybody gets a tax increase.
Yeah. So
Okay.
we are doing what we can. I mean, we have met for I can't tell you how many hours in Ways and Means. We're still going to be meeting this week. We're going to be meeting again next week. We're going to be doing hopefully a markup, anytime soon. The leadership has been very clear. President Trump have been very clear. They want to have a bill out by Memorial Day. They want to have it on the president's desk by 4th of July. There's a reason why those deadlines are important. We cannot wait until the end of the year when these tax provisions are set to expire to give some kind of security to the business community. The fact that the TCJA tax cuts expired at the end of this year actually meant that we did not see about $800 billion of investment in our country because businesses took their foot off the gas as far as investing because they didn't know if they could count on these tax cuts or not. So that's further investment in our economy that we want to have happen. So waiting until the last minute means that you're losing out on investments, and I don't think that's a good thing. So we want to have these sooner rather than later. And with all the conversation going on with tariffs and what's happening around the world, it's added security to our job creators. That look, at least you've got a solid tax policy to be able to move on, and that's the message that we need to be able to send.
The president's always talked about like no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, whatever. Where do those other provisions stand? I mean, are those priorities for the Ways and Means Committee?
So obviously, this is something that the president has, campaigned on. This is something that the president, won on. We were working families definitely support this. We're trying to give the president as many wins as we possibly can, understanding as well. One of the things that he had said in the State of the Union is he also wants to get to a balanced budget. So I think we are working the numbers right now, recognizing the fact that these are, very, very large, hundreds of billions of dollars in costs, and we just want to make sure that we have the pay for it. But again, this is something that the American people are supportive of, and we're trying to figure out as many wins within the tax code as possible for this president and for the American people.
You mentioned DOGE and Elon Musk and some of these things, and I think there's a lot. Like I love what is happening, but Elon's getting ready to start to phase out. And I guess the question is, one, do you think that like a lot of the stuff that has been exposed is going to be actually addressed? That they will cut it, eliminate it, et cetera. You guys will codify that in law, whether that's actual waste or inefficiencies or like cutting funding for PBS and NPR. And is there going to be an effort and a continuation after Elon leaves to make sure that this just doesn't just die on the vine? Is everyone fired up, to keep doing this? Because I feel like if it wasn't for Elon, I don't know that we'd be here.
Well, you worked in the White House, so you had probably a little bit different experience than I did working in the belly of the beast at HUD, an agency where lawsuits and the federal employee unions were so strong. I think a lot of this is going to end up in the courts. I want to make sure that we've got the backbone, even, once this president is gone, to be able to hold the line and making sure that people are getting back to work. All that stuff's going to end up in courts. I have been trying for a number of years now to get a bill passed through that would make two bills, actually. One would have third-party audits on our agencies to make sure that GAO is not doing its job right now. They are not searching for waste, fraud, and abuse. So having third-party audits automatically on these agencies, I think, is key to be able to make sure that the DOGE effort continues well beyond this presidency. The second is looking at the additional regulatory burdens that get put on our business community. $1.8 trillion in excess costs from regulations alone over the Biden administration. I've got a bill right now that would make these agencies, one, have to identify the cost of their regulations, which they don't right now. But two, would be able to take that cost and make sure that they are cleaning house, because it would have to be budget negative or budget neutral, meaning they can't keep layering on. So if they want to add a regulation, they're going to have to look at what regulations they are taking off the table that are adding troublesome, dollar burdens. Then that's basically codifying President Trump's efforts. For every one regulation you add, you got to take away two. But I'm looking at it in dollar amounts. And I think, forcing the agencies to have to clean house and go back and look at the provisions that they put in place that weren't doing the job, that have just aged, that are duplicative, is going to be important. So codifying what this administration is trying to get is going to be key to moving forward. Because let's face it, talking about regulations is not sexy. It wasn't until you got Elon Musk talking about it. and the fact that it became sexy, but it's going to lose the focus of the American public, especially if they start losing some of these cases in the courts. But having an effort like looking at and making sure that the regulations are getting trimmed down automatically, and looking at these third-party audits, I think it's really important moving forward.
You were a mayor, you worked at HUD. When you I always wonder when you're having these conversations with your colleagues, I mean, you can draw on a lot more experience than a lot of them can, because you can say, to your point about regulations and agencies, like, I've done it, I've been there, or I was a mayor, I know what it's, I mean, like, how much, like, I always wonder about those interpersonal discussions when somebody's talking about a policy and Beth Van Duyne sitting there saying to herself, okay, I don't, this isn't some theoretical discussion. Like, I know what it's like to be at an agency and how these regulations impact people doing business. Like, do those things actually come up in your discussions with people about policy?
Well, a lot of us have to, look, all of us are drawing on different levels of experience, whether or not it's the private sector experience and you've faced, some of these tax hurdles, directly, or is working for a bureaucracy and recognizing the fact that the bureaucracy will protect its own. And no matter who is in office, they're going to go ahead and do what they want anyway, and trying to hold them accountable is very hard. So yeah, we all have different levels of experience, and you talk about my experience as mayor, my experience at HUD. Yeah, I have a lot of experience working with bureaucracy and recognizing the fact that you just got to cut straight to the point. You don't have a whole lot of time. You've got a certain number of rocks in your pocket. If you're trying to build this path, you cannot waste any time. And I think, one of the major differences between this administration and last is you recognize how quickly 4 years goes by, and how long of this cycle is going to take to get some of these changes to happen, whether or not, it's acts of Congress, acts of the court. So I have been very clear in our conversations, and whether it's in Ways and Means or in small business, about the importance of cutting regulations, the importance of not having these federal strangleholds on local communities, and the importance of state rights. And the states having the ability to be able to dictate how they move forward. But we have a lot of disparate voices in Congress. I think it's a good thing. But amongst Republicans, people wonder why we are not always all on the same page. And I think it's because we really do bring thoughtfulness to our conversations and recognize the fact that we really do represent different districts.
As you were talking about this, I was thinking about, you mentioned the word like pay fors, and the president's been very clear that these tariffs are bringing in a ton of money. So, when you go back to your district and you hear from business owners, how does this playing out for someone like you? You're talking to businesses that probably are dealing in them. You're talking to consumers, and then you're also looking at it from like a budgetary standpoint, like how much money. So how are the tariffs playing in your world, in terms of both revenue and then the impact of people in Texas?
It's very difficult to put, if you're going to use a tariff as a pay for, it's very difficult in this environment because you don't know what number that's going to be. A lot of the tariffs that the president has thrown out, he's taken back, he has paused, he's put on pause. And it's really being used as a negotiating strategy to bring these countries to the table to say, look, we want to have free trade, but it needs to be fair trade. So we can't really put a number in that the tariffs are, a revenue number that the tariffs are generating. When I'm talking to businesses in my district, they're having a hard time right now. We had a builders roundtable, a home builders roundtable last time I was home, and we had about 15 people at the table talking about, look, we're trying to build homes. We have people moving here from California, from Chicago. We have a lot of growth and we have a lot of need for housing. But with these tariffs, it's making it very difficult. We've got businesses who have invested, and now they may have some manufacturing in China, and now they're struggling to try to figure out how they're going to bring that back on shore, or how they're going to put that in a different country that has a more favorable trade in tariff relationship with the U.S. But it's happening at breakneck speed. And that is something that they are struggling to overcome. They don't know if it's going to be long term or not. I think the more guarantees of security that we can give to businesses, the better off they are. When they know what the rules are, they can play by them. But we change them so often that it's very difficult. They're looking at long-term, 10-year, 20-year investments in these businesses, and we're changing the rules every 2 years.
Yeah, but do they get the goal, right? In other words, I get what I've said to folks is President Trump politically could have done the easy thing, which is just say, all right, here's certainty. You're going to keep getting screwed in terms of market access into India or the UK or to Japan or whatever, or I can fight. To your point, you said it, that he's using these as a negotiating tool. If those other countries don't think he's serious, they won't negotiating with him. So I get it. It's this balance of hopefully it's not long term. If we get a great deal, Scott Bassett said that there's like 50 countries that they're
right.
So do you just tell them, hey guys, I get it. It's going to be a little bumpy for a while.
That's the case. I mean, look, we have gotten into this mess because of decades and decades of neglect of letting these countries, especially China, walk all over us. And so I think they understand as Americans why this is important. But some of these small businesses that are basically trying to hang on now and have very fragile margins that are trying to hang on now after experiencing what they did during COVID, competing with a lot of large, multinational corporations, they're the ones who are having the hardest time. And yes, I tell them to hold on, and this will all be over soon. But the question is whether or not they've got enough gas in the tank to be able to stay in business. And some of them are really struggling. And we are trying to promise them, look, we have a president who understands. You've got a Congress that understands a lot of tax policies are going to be important. And we're going to try to make it as easy for you as possible on a tax policy. So while you may be experiencing pain on the tariffs until we get those negotiated, we're going to try to help you on the tax policy is another reason why we need to get this bill passed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think that tax policy is critical because that's the one thing that not only helps businesses, but if you want to incentivize behavior, whether that's onshoring or manufacturing in general, then having a better tax policy than another country to me would be in creating a better business environment would be smarter. When he talks about stuff like tariffs on films, does that affect people businesses in Texas, or is that a California thing?
He said he wants to save a dying Hollywood. I don't know that I agree with that. I'm fine to let Hollywood die. I've seen the crap that's come out of that industry, and you're looking for like jewels in a field of poo. But I'm okay with letting Hollywood die and seeing where it's rising, seeing where you're getting that industry in other areas of the country. I think it also, if we're looking at taxing imports, we also have to be very careful because I think that's one industry where we make a lot more money on exports than we do on than we have in importing films. But I think that you've seen a lot, especially since COVID and especially since this whole idea of parents now recognizing the wokeness and how it was affecting their kids and no longer being willing to pay for those movies. I think you're seeing a lot of private industries pop up all around the country and not just in Hollywood. So
I agree. You know what? I don't want to save Hollywood. I love some of the stuff that's coming out of like Angel Studios or Brave Books, whatever. Yeah, I'm with you. Why are we saving bad? Because these guys are making horrible content. Before I let you go, I got to say the one issue that I'm really intrigued by somebody from Texas's take on is, and you mentioned this at the beginning a little, but I just want you to I know that you're closer to like the Dallas area, but do people in Texas in general feel the difference of what's happened with immigration and border security?
Absolutely.
Is it something that's talked about when you're out? because I just don't get, we always talk about every state's a border state, right? But I will be honest, as someone who lives in Virginia, I don't think people are walking up to me and wow, I totally see the difference on the border. But you guys in Texas are always at the forefront of this, in Arizona, et cetera. Is this something that comes up when you're talking to constituents and people, or is it because you're a little more insular, it's less so?
No, we're right on that 35 corridor. So, it is absolutely, we're one of the largest cities, one of the largest areas, fourth largest metroplex in the country. So we are a magnet for that kind of activity. When you talk to the FBI 4 years ago, they were telling me that they had actually more drug cartels and illegal organizations that were having activities in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So we absolutely felt it. And now, given the fact all the work that Tom Homan is doing and Kristi Noem, and we are trying to support him to make sure that these deportations can continue, we're definitely feeling it in our communities. And I don't think that I've been to any kind of roundtable business tour or meeting with constituents where it has not been mentioned. People are very grateful for what they see in the communities and the decrease in crime. And look, this, I can speak directly about this issue as a former mayor that had a fantastic relationship with her local law enforcement. And we had partnerships with Immigration and Customs Enforcement that concentrated on deporting criminal illegal aliens before it was popular. we got criticized. We got criticized from all across the country, but our community really appreciated it because we saw a direct decrease in our crime. We became one of the 5th safest cities in the country. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens by enforcing your laws, by having those partnerships at the local, state, and federal level, and you absolutely feel it in your communities. And I think, whether or not you're in Texas or whether or not you are in Illinois, whether or not you're in Idaho, you are feeling the results of an administration that is taking our border security safety seriously and is enforcing our laws. So it's something that we're feeling in Dallas, and we are very, very happy that Tom Homan, Kristi Noem, and President Trump are looking at this.
Awesome. Congresswoman Beth Van Duyne, appreciate your insight. I love your take on this, and I'm with you. Let's not save Hollywood. Thanks for being with us today.
Great to see you, Sean.
Good
Thank
to see
you.
You bet.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.